welcome to While You're at the Library. We know that this is your favorite librarian staffed television discussion show. And here we are welcoming you to our discussion. I'm Catherine Poulter, I'm the children's librarian, and next to me is John Bickelhaupt.
Hello.
And then there's Kathan Hendricks.
Hello.
Becky Hadley.
Hi.
And Trent Clegg.
Hello.
Trent, will you tell us about some of the books that you've, well, at least one of the books that you've brought in your stack?
I will start with a 4-year-old book called The Collapse by Mary Elise Sarraute. This book is about the fall of the Berlin Wall. And basically the premise of the book is how it was not an inevitable thing that the Berlin Wall would fall, that East Germany would dissolve, and that Germany would reunite. And this is basically a recounting of all of the events that led up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it's kind of like an adventure story. It's one of those suspenseful adventure stories where you're like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Because it was like this perfect storm of circumstances that all came together that caused the fall of the Berlin Wall. And what makes it even more extraordinary is that it was accomplished without a lot of bloodshed, a lot of physical violence. Normally when a regime topples, it is done with a lot of physical violence, a lot of people dying, a lot of bad things happening to people. And this was surprisingly peaceful. It just all of a sudden happened. There had been things leading up to it, but it just happened, and the people who had normally been on the borders, the border guards that were used to killing people that were trying to escape, they just stopped. And so it's fascinating to read through this book. Also, it's fascinating to me because I've actually been to Berlin. I've seen the portion of the wall that is still standing. I've stood underneath the Brandenburg Gate. I've seen the Reichstag building. And to just be in that city where all this history has happened, you can read place names and you're like, I know where that is. So, if you haven't been to Berlin and you choose to read this book, which I really think you should, we have a lovely thing that's called the internet, and you can look these places up and there are pictures of them. It's fascinating. Another interesting little fact, just that is relevant to our current world political situation, one of the major things that happened to start the ball rolling for the fall of the Berlin Wall happened in the city of Dresden, which was in East Germany. And the head of the KGB at the time, at the satellite office that was in Dresden, was none other than Vladimir Putin. He has seen the peaceful toppling of a totalitarian regime and knows how it happened. So, should we want to topple a totalitarian regime in the future and he's on the other side of it, we might want to try a different playbook. But in any instance, this is a fascinating book that is relevant to our times as well, called The Collapse. Come and get it at the library today.
Ooh, that was a good advertisement.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was really good. Becky.
Before we talk about books, I want to talk about programs.
Oh, good.
Because it's summertime, so that means we've got our summer reading programs. And so we've got children, teens, and adults. And I'd like to talk about the adult program. So when the adults sign up, they get this nice reading log where they keep track of the books they read and the pages.
Number of pages.
Yeah, number of pages. So when they get 500 pages, they can come in and get a small incentive. And the goal is to get 2,000 pages read by middle of August. And then we've also had different programs, and we're halfway through the summer. And so we've had some programs, and some of the ones that we have left for July is we have coloring pages on July 11th, creating book journals on July 25th, and a Harry Potter breakout activity on the 31st, which you do have to register for.
And that's Harry Potter's birthday.
It is Harry Potter's birthday.
So you're going to break Harry Potter out.
Of his room under the stairs, why not?
Why not? Yes.
Muggles.
So fun activities and fun incentives. Another thing that's part of the adult program that we did last year was a kindness challenge, and we are redoing that again this year, where you do 25 days of kindness. Our whole theme is based around Libraries Rock, and so we call this our Kindness Rocks Challenge, and that gives you an extra entry into our grand prize drawing.
Great.
So there's going to be some fun things to win, And if you finish the 2,000 pages, you get invited to a reader's brunch. And so only people who finished the challenge will actually be there.
Ooh, nice.
So, yeah,
Fellow readers.
exactly. We'll talk about books, of course.
And
while-
eat.
While we eat some yummy muffins and fruit and whatever. Yeah.
Very good.
So-
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
Kathann, what do you have to follow that up with?
Following on the heels of Becky's adult summer reading program, here is my piece of paper that I forgot to bring that tells about the teen summer reading program, which is similar but different. I am encouraging the teens to read at least 150 pages. Actually, they have to read 450 altogether before they get an incentive, which in my case is usually a book, free book.
Nice.
And they can do that 3 times, so they can win up to 3 free books or some other little incentive. If they finish everything, all 9 pieces of a puzzle that's on the back side of their registration form, then they will also receive a chance to be in a drawing for something larger. We have a midsummer drawing for anybody who's participated for some free tickets to go swimming at Ross Park. And one of our grand prize drawings is some tickets to go to Lava Hot Springs, which is good for the entire year. We'll have lots of other incentives. We've had some really fun Monday programs. The last one we did was some dance demo, because
yeah.
you know, libraries rock. And it was really fun. The person talked about movement and music and how we move differently, and you know, it was really very entertaining. One of our Wednesday activities, which involves food, they called it Forte Food, the kids that helped me planned it, which means loud. The last one we did was American Pie, and it was so much fun because I found a good source for making these little miniature pies
They're so
out
sweet.
of mason jar lids, taking the screw band and the lid and then making your crust in there, putting a couple tablespoons of pie filling and another crust, and they take 20 minutes to bake. The kids were fascinated, and they really had fun. And
That's
we've
great.
done a macaroni and cheese one where you did lots of different add-ins. That was Sweet Dreams Are Made of Cheese.
Man.
You thought of some really
So,
good,
yes.
painfully good
I think
names.
I'll
We've
roll
had
my eyes.
some fun. Well, they're all based on songs or a portion of songs. One of my favorite ones is going to be "Do You Want Fries with That?" And if anybody's familiar with country western music, you can look that one up. It's
I liked
it's an
American
entertaining.
Pie.
It's a very entertaining song, and I won't tell you any more about it. But it was just something to name them. And additionally, we always have our movies on Tuesdays, and there's children's movies on Thursdays, and our STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math on Fridays.
That's great.
So there's really no reason to be bored. Every day the kids come in and say, "What's happening today?" And we have to
There's
you know,
something new.
there's
and
something happening every day at 2 o'clock. And additionally, the Harry Potter party that Becky's talking about, well, the breakout, we're doing a teen party on the 27th for just teens. That's why we're repeating it on Harry Potter's birthday for the general public. And it will be a breakout where you have to solve the locks to get the muggles free. I believe that's what the story is. And there will be additional things, you know, for the kids to do, food. And of course, always food. And that will be limited to the teens that night after we close. And then Tuesday will be a sign up for families or groups or whatever to participate
Great.
in one that's very similar. And then I'll talk about books later.
All right. John, have you read any of those books there?
I've read this one.
Oh, tell us about it.
This one's called Once Upon an Algorithm. And How Stories Explain Computing. And it doesn't explain how computers work, but it explains how programs are written and the problem solving that's done with programs. And an algorithm is basically a process you have a job you need to do on a computer, and you break it up into steps. Okay, and some of them, you know, some programs can have an awful lot of steps, and they do what's called branching, which is where the program will find a certain condition and
Flow
do one
charts
thing,
kinds of
or
thing.
if it finds a different condition, it'll do something else. And there's a whole lot of that that goes on in computing. But one of the things that they talk about that's pretty interesting is sorting, because that's a very important part of computing is just simply sorting things. And they talk about different types of sorts. And the difference in the amount of time that different sorts take is amazing. It's like there's one called a binary sort, and a binary sort is where you have, like, say you've got 500 items, and a real binary search. Say you've got 500 items, and you're looking for a particular item. You look at and these items are actually sorted. Then you go to number 500 out of 1,000, and then if that's too low, you go
Higher.
to 750, and you just
And narrow it down.
narrow it down. And that means you know if you can do something in like a maximum of 10 or 12 steps that way. Sort of 1,000. You can
Find
find
a
a number
specific number among
among
1,000.
1,000, yeah. And whereas if you were just to try to go through them one at a time, that's prohibitively long. So he talks, as you can see, he talks a lot about Hansel and Gretel
Ah, yes.
as one of his models, leaving the little pebbles
On the way.
on the way, and
Those were breadcrumbs.
well,
The
the
first
birds ate
time.
them the
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah, the first
Yeah.
time it was pebbles.
Yeah, the first time was pebbles, and then the second time was breadcrumbs, because
Bad
old
idea.
Dad wouldn't let them have pebbles.
Bad idea.
So,
Dastardly.
yeah. So, but that's one of the stories they use as an example, and they have a number of others that they talk about.
Is it written in plain English so you don't have to know what?
It is in plain
an
English, and that was one of the
algorithm is
things
at
that I
first?
enjoyed about it, was that I just read it, and it was like a pleasant read, and it was interesting, and I liked it. So he used Sherlock Holmes to talk about representation in data structures.
Oh, very good.
So, and then there's this whole thing about sorting. I kind of got sorting mixed up with searching
Yeah,
at the beginning. So
but you meant searching.
I
instead
meant
of sorting.
searching, not sorting. So, and then he talks about recursion. And recursion is one of those subjects that I have trouble getting my head around. It's like a procedure that references itself in order to accomplish what it's doing.
Good definition,
That
Yeah.
actually.
makes sense.
That was really good.
But I still don't understand the
Yeah.
rest of it. But
Right. And I have to say I sort of get it now.
Sort of.
Sort of. I sort of get it now. But I figure if I bang my head against this long enough, that at some point
It'll sink in.
it'll all sink in and make
Not
sense.
this quickly, but it will sink in.
Yeah. Oh, he uses Groundhog Day too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So looping. Groundhog is a good example of looping. Yeah.
And changing one little element every
Right.
time.
Every time. And then finally
Arriving at the solution.
arriving at the solution, and the program terminates. So,
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
that's why
Thank
I
you.
don't do this.
Sure.
Well, I really like to read. And I've been reading a lot of books, and I've actually been reading a lot of grown-up books, but then I turned to this book. It's a children's book. It's called The Truth is Told by Mason Buttle, and it's one of the best books I've read for a long time. Mason is a young man. He's very big for his age. He also has, I don't know what it is. It's a bodily syndrome where he sweats profusely. He has to bring a couple of new shirts to school every day because he just drenches a shirt, more than one shirt a day. He also has a learning disability. He has really bad dyslexia. He cannot read. But he's the kindest and the most sensitive to other people boy that I've read about for a long time. Mason also has some tragedy in his life. His mother has died. He's being raised by his uncle, and a year before the book took place, his best friend was killed in an accident. The friend was going down a ladder from a tree house that the two had built together, and he slipped and fell and died, and Mason was the one that found him. Well, that really hurt him and haunted him. And not only that, the deputy thinks that there's something that Mason's not talking about, so the detective is coming over all the time, but he's given them everything he can, and the deputy finally gives him a notebook and says, write down what it is that you remember. And of course, for Mason, he can't read, he can't write, but his very wise resource teacher finds a program, a computer program that will translate his spoken words into written words. So he can sit down and just tell it like it is. And a lot of the book is about him telling what happened. And then he does find a new friend. And he and his new friend don't want to have, there's some bullying involved, don't want the bullies to find out where they're going after school, and so they find their own secret hideout. But wonderful story, and you can really see things from all the perspectives, from Mason's, from his uncle's, from the new best friend. It's a good book and very well written, and it's one of my favorites that I've read for a very long time. So, The Truth is Told by Mason Buttle, and it's by Leslie Connor. I liked it. Well, Trent, tell us about something else.
Okay. This is a book that I brought last time we did a TV show, and I wasn't able to talk about it because we ran out of time. But this book is called Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship by Gregory Boyle. Now, Gregory Boyle is a Jesuit priest. He was ordained in 1984. But what he did, what he has done, he created an organization called Homeboy Industries. It's based in Los Angeles. And what it is it's a gang intervention, rehabilitation, and societal re-entry organization. It helps young people who are involved in gangs get out of the gangs. It helps them work through some of the issues that they've had, that they either acquired while they were in the gang or was the reason that they were in the gang to begin with. And then it helps them gain the skills that they need to go back into society and not fall back into those old patterns. And he'd written a previous book called Tattoos on the Heart that talked more about the formation, I believe, of the organization. But this book, Barking to the Choir, it's basically a collection of stories and instances about some of the people that he has worked with that have come out of the gangs, talked about their transformations as they've experienced unconditional love, because that's what this Jesuit priest uses in his as the basis of all the things that they do is unconditional love, very much Christian-centered in that respect, and helps these people reclaim a sense of themselves and a sense of the fact that they are loved. And he talks about the transformations that happen in each one of these people as they begin to find love within themselves, for other people. And so this is a very, very positive book. Notice that the dominant color scheme of the cover is a nice bright yellow with some really intense orange there in the middle, but it's a very, very positive book. And I think it's definitely one that we can use in our own interactions these days, the power of unconditional love to transform people's hearts. So again, it's called Barking to the Choir, The Power of Radical Kinship by Gregory Boyle. It's currently housed in our 14-day, which means it's still considered a new book, but we've had it for a while, and since February, so it won't be too long before you'll be able to check it out for 28 days and just savor every word.
Now, what is radical kinship?
Radical kinship, the way that he approaches reclaiming these people. A lot of times gang members fall into gangs because they are looking for inclusion. They're looking for a sense of belonging, a sense of family. And so radical kinship is basically helping these people leave that kinship, really. I mean, a gang is its own kinship. It is its own family. But if you've got somebody who's looking to leave and is having difficulty, you've got to give them some place to transfer to. And, you know, sometimes that requires some pretty radical love. And radical meaning extreme, you know. For people who like extreme thrills, you know, extreme love is right up there. You know, jumping off buildings with a bungee cord, you know, going down the steepest slope on skis. Well, sometimes loving people that aren't necessarily very lovable on the outside, that can be considered radical love. And so the power of radical kinship.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's this book. You're welcome.
Well, I brought 2 World War II books that I'd like to share today. So the first one is a historical fiction, and it's called The Taster by V.S. Alexander, and this is a new book in the adult fiction section. And this book is set in the early 40s, and our main character is being kind of passed around for the family, trying to keep her safe. Well, she goes to stay with an aunt and uncle, and they're all excited because they found her a job, because it's really important for the women to work during the war, show your support. Needless to say, they don't know what they've exactly signed her up for, but they've been told it's a safe job, that she'll be working along the side of Hitler. Now,
So they're in Germany?
they're in Germany, yes. So she gets up there and they tell her right off the bat, you cannot tell your family what job you have, but you will be Hitler's food taste tester.
Does she have poison?
So she learns about poisons, and every meal that he has, there's these tasters, and there's several women that the food goes through before it goes through Hitler. I did not know, but he was very concerned about being poisoned.
It's very
And
paranoid.
Is this an alternative history where he
No,
really does die of poisoning?
This is based
No,
on
it's based on
fact
fact.
until the end, because it starts out, I know how Hitler really died. And so it's her viewpoint of what really happened in that secret bunker. And it's a completely different view than I've ever seen before, because usually we're reading the American side. But she was just as scared of Hitler as somebody just walking down the street would be, even though she knew him, and she actually had several conversations with Eva, I think is her
Eva
name.
Braun.
Yes. They were acquaintances. And anyways, big eye-opener, and it is fiction, but there's a lot of research that was done to put this book together. And we really don't know what happened in that bunker, and it's a possibility. So then, to switch gears here, this one is actually nonfiction. We know it's a true story. So Lieutenant Terry's Christmas Fudge by Gerald Lund, and this is located in the 940s, but it's a new book currently. It is a Christmas book just because it does talk about Christmas towards the end. But this is Lieutenant Terry, how he gets called to war at the end of the war. He gets called in and he becomes a airplane pilot. He drives or pilots one of the bombers. Well, they get hit and he becomes a prisoner of war. And I love this book, how it has a lot of different faith-promoting stories in it. But the one it does focus on is he gets a package from the Red Cross. And they do like a lottery to see who in his bunker is going to be able to receive this package. And it's just this little package. He explains that it's like almost the size of a deck of cards. It's just little. And inside there's some sugar, some powdered milk, and 2 cubes of chocolate. There's a little journal. And he thinks to himself, I could just gobble all this down. But instead, he takes a container and he goes over to their little fire and he makes out of these 2 little squares of chocolate some Christmas fudge. And he shares with 23 other men this fudge.
A teeny tiny little piece.
Yeah, so he said it was less than the top of his pinky, and everybody got it. And there were some people that just immediately devoured it. There were people that would just lick it and make it last for days. And how grateful they were for him to share this very rare gift. And the other thing that's really cool in this is it does share pictures that he drew in his journal while he was a prisoner of war throughout it. And it shows what different pieces of his package may have looked like. Of course, I can't find that right now. Different letters, because they were able to receive letters from home while they were in this camp. Very good book. So if you haven't read it, I definitely suggest it, whether or not it's Christmas time. So
Thank you.
Speaking of World War II, this book came across my desk this morning, and I was fascinated because I don't know very much about the Zoot Suit riots, but this was in 1943, and this author was on NPR just yesterday that I heard. The author is Margarita Engel, and she's won a number of awards. She's a Cuban-American author, and she's written many novels in verse, including Surrender Tree, which was a Newbery Honor winner, and several others that received the Pura Belpré Award. And she was a finalist for the YALSA, Young Adult Library Services Association, for her excellence in nonfiction. She's written several books and is a very well-renowned author. This is a story of what led to and what happened during the Zoot Suit riots. This was in Southern California, in Los Angeles. There were a lot of Mexican Americans or people that were coming across the border to work, and during the war, they were trying to encourage people to do whatever they could to bolster the spirits of the servicemen. And so here we have young white sailors who are from mostly, a lot of them from Europe or the Midwest, and they're now in an area where there's a large population of Mexican immigrants or Mexican Americans. And the girls were encouraged to dance with them, you know, to right before they'd have to go out and serve, to take their minds off what they, you know, whether or not they might survive. And they called the girls the Jazz Owl Girls. And then one night, something happens where they believe it was racial violence, and somebody is murdered. And the boys, dressed in what they called zoot suits, which took lots of fabric. So they'd take a woman's skirt and they would cinch it up at the ankle, and it would be very loose and blousy. And these sailors felt like this was wrong because they were having rationing, and they were telling them they couldn't waste material. And so they saw this as a waste of material. The girls dancing with the sailors upset their brothers and their boyfriends, and so there was a lot of racial tension. And so this is told, like I said, in verse. You hear like different persons' stories. Like this girl, Lorena, says, "Maybe I should have stayed in school because Spanish is forbidden here at work too." Ray mixes his words back and forth or makes up completely new ones like "wacha" and "let's eat picnic," "lucha at lunch," or "look at all those trocas and Parquadaro lot." I can't say them all. And they talk about, you know, how they feel and what happened, and the police, and how they actually turned a blind eye to what was going on because they felt like it was media that it made it worse for them, actually. And what I was reading about it, they were making the Mexican people sound like they were there, you know, in a gang, and that they were bad people and they needed to be cleared out. And so they let the sailors beat up on them. And anyway, there's a lot of history here during World War II, and it's really interesting to read it in a verse form so that you hear all sides of the story. You hear from the policemen, You hear from the girls, you hear from the boys that were beat up, you feel, you know, it's very interesting. At any rate, so it's not a very long book. It's probably something that will give you new interesting, you know, information about if you didn't know anything about the Zoot Suit Wars, which I've heard of, but I didn't really know that much about. So there's that.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm next.
Yes, indeed.
With everything that's going on in the news lately, I thought I should order some books on journalism for the collection.
Speaking of journalism.
Yeah, speaking of journalism. And so I just procured this one recently. It's titled The New Ethics of Journalism, and it's a collection of essays. There's a fair number of, Clay Shirky, he's somebody I've heard of. Most of these people, I think I've heard of Eric Deggans, but a lot of these writers I'm not journalists, I'm not familiar with, but this is essays that they've written about it. And they offer a new set of guiding principles for journalists, and
Keeping their sources good.
right, keeping their sources good, and the thing that's happened with journalism is that and this happens every time there's a new form of communication that comes up, a new kind of media,
Like
and
Twitter.
like Twitter. Or in the 30s, in the 20s and 30s, it was radio and film, and then in the 60s it was television. But television was less. It was less disruptive because it was there were only 3 networks, and there was a fair amount of government regulation of the media. And the internet's been kind of like the Wild West, and so that's one of the things that's kind of undermined journalism in this country. And then the other thing is the concentration of the media in few hands.
Right.
So it's the other thing that's going on. If you recall, there was
Mergers and things.
there was a news story a few weeks ago where these people who work at different stations throughout the country, I guess Sinclair Broadcasting, they work at different television stations throughout the country. They were handed a piece, a thought piece, a think piece that they were supposed to read on the air. And the way it was represented was that it was like, here's a newsman who's giving his opinion on things. But then somebody took the trouble to collect the broadcasts of all the stations where it had been read, and it was the same piece of content word for word, no matter where it was broadcast, but it was kind of represented as originating locally, because the readers were all like local newsmen, and it was kind of chilling. It was a little bit chilling to see that. So in any case, that is interesting. So that was one of the reasons I thought we should have some books on journalism.
And ethics.
This one is called The Elements of Journalism, and at the very beginning they have a list of things that they think are the defining characteristics of good journalism. And they say journalism's first obligation is to the truth, its first loyalty is to citizens, its essence is a discipline of verification, its practitioners must maintain an independence from those they cover, it must serve as an independent monitor of power, it must provide a forum for public criticism and compromise, it must strive to make the significant interesting and relevant. It must keep the news comprehensive and in proportion. Its practitioners have an obligation to exercise their personal conscience, and citizens too have rights and responsibilities when it comes to the news. And these are all things that I think it's very important for us to remember, to recall and consider, because a lot of the media that we're getting our information from these days is violating those principles.
That veracity one, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. So I felt like it was kind of important to have some some fresh, content about journalism for people to look at if they wanted to
Yeah.
find out more about it.
Thank you. That's interesting. I have something on the light side. This is Narwhal, the unicorn of the sea. Here is the little narwhal, and here is his sidekick, or maybe it's the other way around, Jellyfish. And this is a storybook about the jellyfish and the narwhal and how they build their friendship and get along. And here's another chapter in this book, Narwhal and the Best Book Ever. It's about a blank book. Here you can see what's written here. And they can put anything they want into it. So they have some ideas, waffles, a robot, a kung fu master waffle guy, all sorts of good things. This is a new series. It's called Narwhal and Jelly, and this was the first volume, Narwhal, Unicorn of the Sea. Thank you.
Who's it by?
It's by Ben Clanton.
It
It's in the junior fiction section.
reminds me of Frog and Toad Are Friends.
It does, doesn't it? It's very
Or
similar.
Piggy.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Elephant and Piggy.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's a good story, and there's more. This is only the first of, I think there's 5 volumes. So, Narwhal, Unicorn of the Sea, a lighter subject. Now on to Trent.
I think that's darling.
Uh-huh.
Alrighty. A couple other books that we have currently in our 14-day new nonfiction section. This is called Preservation Pantry. Modern Canning from Root to Top and Stem to Core. This isn't your mother's home canning book. This
Oh, I thought it was.
yeah. While it does indeed include tips and techniques for preserving food and canning food, the emphasis and what makes this book special is how to use all of the food that you harvest or purchase from the farmer's market or purchase. Talks a lot about using, like when you're snapping beans, how you can use the tips of both ends as part of something really delicious. How to use the leaves of a radish or something other edible leaves of plants and to put them into recipes that you can then preserve. And it's full of a lot of full color photography. Gives a lot of, doesn't that look yummy?
Yeah. Is that the bean tip?
Let's see, liquid gold vegetable stock is the recipe, and you preserve that. And the dish that's here to advertise the stock that you use is kumquat pistachio chicken with coconut black sesame rice.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. And
Have you made anything from this?
I have not yet made anything from this. I'm in the middle of moving, so I don't have a lot of
Oh,
time in
okay.
the kitchen. But for instance, here you've got oranges. And I mean, something that we've been doing for generations is using orange peel to make orange marmalade. But again, this is a good illustration of exactly the ethos that informs this book about using everything. There's a huge food movement these days of using all of the food. We've got a couple of books.
What do you do with apple stems?
I think with
Compost.
apples, it's much more about using the core of the apple than it
okay.
is about the stem. But for instance, when you're cooking carrots, a lot of times people will cut the ends off, and you can use carrot greens. You can eat them. Pickling, like, what vegetable was it that I saw in here? It was a type of squash, where a lot of times people will cut off the ends of the squash, and they actually pickle it and put it as part of what's in the jar.
Wow.
So, a beautiful full color book
That's beautiful.
about using all of the food that you have. And then also, we have a book called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, The Search for the Lost Disney Cartoons.
Ooh.
Yes. Now Oswald, as you can see, he looks a lot like Mickey Mouse.
He does.
But Oswald actually is the older brother of Mickey Mouse. before Walt Disney had his own independent animation studio, he was associated with Universal Pictures. And Oswald was created to compete with Felix the Cat and other early animated characters that were being animated for other studios. And so Oswald was the Universal Picture answer to those other cartoons. And Walt Disney and his partner Ub Iwerks were the creators of Oswald the Rabbit. And what made Oswald special and why he became such a big hit was a lot of times these characters were merely ciphers so that comic gags could be acted out, but these cartoon characters didn't really have character. They really didn't have their own personalities. And Walt wanted Oswald to have a personality. He wanted him to be specific, not just in the storylines or the things that the character did, but in how the character was animated, so that he was immediately distinguishable as Oswald. And Oswald is a big hit. And the cartoons ran from 1927 to, I believe, 1929 under Walt Disney's guidance, direction, creation. But then someone associated with Universal Pictures or a subsidiary of Universal Pictures outmaneuvered Walt Disney in business, and Walt Disney lost the rights to Oswald. Now, Walt could have fought for Oswald, but where he was in his life and in his career, he decided to just walk away. And instead, he created Mickey Mouse, who became, the ultimate early cartoon character. And in some ways, for the 20th century, Mickey Mouse, if you want to talk about an iconic cartoon character, Mickey Mouse comes right to mind. And so in a way, Walt Disney kind of got his revenge as far as losing that business deal.
Just by being himself.
Just by being himself and doing what he did. But in the meantime, the Universal Studios, they continued to use Oswald and animate shorts about Oswald. The person who created Woody Woodpecker ended up working on Oswald and kind of changed his look quite a bit.
Is that Lance?
Well,
Sorry.
now it's out of my head. But the guy who created Woody Woodpecker, look him up. It's
Okay.
the era of Google. But this book focuses on the cartoons that Walt Disney wrote, and it has a separate little section for each of the Oswald cartoons, Rival Romeos. It gives some of the background, a little bit of story about it, and then it talks about the story of the cartoon itself. And in the front of the book, it also talks about just the story of Oswald, his creation, and then how they found some lost Oswald cartoons that they thought had been completely lost. And Walt Disney reclaimed Oswald in 2006. So Oswald has finally come back home, and not only do they have the rights to all the Disney animated cartoons from the 20s, but they also have started using the Oswald character in new things, in Disney animated games, computer games, and in a couple of other animated projects. So Oswald has not only come back to Disney, but he's come back to life as a Disney character.
Cool.
So this book talks all about that.
Great,
That's
thank
slick.
you.
I like
It
that.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I brought a cookbook too.
Oh, good. Share it.
This one is called Brave Tart. And this takes a lot of well-known American dishes. So like I opened up to peanut brittle. This one's caramel vanilla peanut brittle.
Wow.
And it has the recipe, and then it will tell you history behind the recipe, how it came to be. And so like this one is graham crackers, the history behind graham crackers, and then how to make your own graham cracker.
My son made some in Poland because he missed graham crackers.
Yeah, and it has things in here like Oreo cookies, Nutter Butters, Twinkies, Ding Dongs. I mean, very American
junk food.
junk food. Yes,
And
the
how
things
to
we
make
all
them.
love. Here we go.
Pop-Tart.
Pop-Tarts.
Haha.
History of Pop-Tarts. And then to follow that will be a recipe you could try for your homemade Pop-Tart. So a lot of reading involved in this cookbook, but very, very interesting.
What's the picture on the next? Just lots of pictures.
Just lots of pictures, lots and
Good.
lots of pictures. So Oreos are what's on the front. So
Or
And right
homemade
now-
Oreos.
Yes, homemade Oreos. So it is a new book, so right now it's only checking out for 14 days. And the recipe book group that we have right now, this is the book that they are choosing a recipe from for their meeting in July.
Wow.
I would imagine that the stuffing in those homemade Oreos is a lot healthier for you than the stuff in the store-bought ones.
That would
You'd
be a
think
good
so.
guess. But lots of sugar either way.
Yum.
Nothing like sugar.
So what do you have for us, Ka?
Okay, I thought I would share this book. We don't yet own it, but I'm going to donate it. This is local. Okay, this is written by Craig C. Collins, and it is about, I believe it's about his uncle. Yes, Major Don Harton. And if you know anything about Pocatello, Harton is a local name around this area. So my book group is reading it, and it talks about a mid-air collision during the Vietnam War, in which Craig's uncle was Major Don Harton, and he was involved in this mid-air collision during the Vietnam War with a B-52 bomber. And he lands in the ocean during a typhoon, and he survives it. And it gives a history of what they thought could have helped, shorten the Vietnam War, as well as just the history of this man's life. And it has some, pictures and things like that. But I've been really fascinated with the references to, different people that I've heard of in this area. And it's been reading pretty well. Says, let's see. Yeah, it was a 1,000,000-to-1 struggle against near certain death. And it really was interesting. You can't believe what he survived in here. But I'm not quite finished with it, but I've been enjoying this read, and I think it was just published a couple of years ago. Let's see. 2016. So even though we don't own it yet, when I'm finished with it, I'll donate it to the library, because I think we should have books that are written about people in Pocatello, and or locals have written them. So it's history, military, Vietnam.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, since Trent talked about an animated rabbit, I figured I should.
Very good.
And, this is my favorite animated rabbit. And if you don't recognize him, where have you been living for the last century? So,
Yeah.
it's Bugs Bunny, of course, and he was a Warner's character. And this is about the Warner Brothers cartoons. And Daffy Duck, Wile E. Coyote, and Porky Pig. On the way over, we were talking about Acme products, which play quite a role in Wile E. Coyote's adventures.
Yes.
Trying to capture the Roadrunner. So this is a book about that, and it looks pretty interesting. This is about the art. So.
That's all, folks.
Ooh.
So they've got a lot of cells drawn on those famous Acme products. And
I wonder, because Oswald, according to the book that I brought, was the first animated rabbit. I wonder if Warner's was like, haha, a rabbit.
Yeah.
And that was much more successful rabbit.
Yeah.
yeah, he was.
Oswald looked more like a mouse than a rabbit to me.
Yeah.
That's because we know Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, of course, but
Maybe he didn't
Long
look like
Bugs
ears.
looked like, long ears, but
Yeah.
but he's colored like a rabbit, so.
yeah.
So, and since we're talking about Warner Brothers, you can't really talk about Warner Brothers without talking about Mel Blanc.
Yes.
And this is a biography of Mel Blanc, and I just saw it on the bookshelf, and I had to bring it. And the thing that really kind of grabbed me about it was that it mentions that at a certain point in his life, he was injured severely in he was basically hit by a car on
Mel
Sunset
Blanc
Boulevard.
was.
Yeah,
Okay,
Mel
yeah.
Blanc. And he was in the hospital, and he was in a coma for 3 weeks. And he was not responding to anything that the doctors or his family or people around him were doing. They were really starting to despair that he was dead. And then one day a doctor had an inspiration. The TV was on with a Warner Brothers cartoon in the background, and he looked at Mel Blanc and he said, well, Bugs Bunny, how are you doing today? And that was when Mel Blanc came out of his coma and answered, just fine, Doc, how are you? So I just thought that was a wonderful story. And I found out that he voiced a lot of characters that I was unaware he had done. He did Barney Rubble.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, and then, among other characters. So he wasn't just exclusively a Warner Brothers artist. He did Woody Woodpecker too.
Oh.
And Woody Woodpecker was Walter Lantz.
Lance, that's the
Yeah.
last name, yeah.
That's who I was thinking of. So yeah, and Mel Blanc did the Woody Woodpecker laugh that I'm sure all of you can recall.
Yeah, let's start that one.
That's great.
So
We all
anyways,
know that.
he's I guess he's one of my heroes in kind of a way.
Yeah, well,
So that's Mel Blanc.
thank you. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I brought 2 amazing books. This book is a perpetual picture atlas. It's called A Moment in Time, and it's really 3 books in one. At the beginning, it has all of the time zones of the world. And then it shows how in each picture these things are happening at the same time. For example, this one at 12 o'clock, I'll find that, is 12 o'clock. These things happen in what we know of as Mountain Time Zone. There is something happening in Nicaragua. Something is happening in Costa Rica. Here's Glacier National Park that's just above Idaho. Here's the Galapagos Islands are in the Mountain Time Zone, or in +7, I guess, from Greenwich time, or -7, something like that. Here's Flor Azul in Honduras and Valparaiso, Chile. All of these things are happening at the same time. We go through the day some more, and then it opens to the side. Look at that. Here's some more of it. And then, after you come to the end of that, then you can open up the back part of the book. Wow. This is 3 books in one, and it has amazing and beautiful, beautiful pictures. So this book, called A Moment in Time, is now available at the library, and you can either read it just from cover to cover to cover to cover, or you can open it up and compare things. And it's so neat. And you can even play it like an accordion if you make the right sounds.
It's the book that doesn't end.
Never does.
It's awesome.
And then here, this is also by the same publishing company. It's called 360 Degrees. This is called the Earth Book. And this has many interesting, fascinating facts about the Earth and the solar system and our place in it, life on Earth. It has some, again, beautiful illustrations and some of the regions of Earth, what animals, for example, were there 10,000 years before Christ, or what happens at the poles, north and south. Every page has something amazing, and it's another beautiful book, and I like it because it's beautiful, and I love Earth.
Do they have the mud skippers climbing up out of the primordial soup?
Ooze, even.
The ooze,
Maybe
the
so.
primordial ooze.
But it does say that there's all sorts of things. It might not talk about the primordial ooze, but it does talk about the water cycle
Mm-hmm.
and the tree of life. How did things,
Evolve.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the different branches on the trees, the Did you know that we are more closely related to fungi than to primordial ooze, for example?
No, didn't know that.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah.
I like
So-
dark, moist places. It's great.
Yes. So anyway, 2 wonderful books. I like that. Does anyone else have a hankering to talk about the last thing on the last book?
I'll just briefly mention we just got this book called Rescue Road.
Oh, good.
1 man, 30,000 dogs, and 1,000,000 miles on the Last Hope Highway. It's about a man named Greg Molly who had lost a series of restaurants that he had been managing or running, and finally he had come to the end of that. He was kind of depressed. His sister asked him if he could help this woman who was in the midst of trying to bring these dogs from shelters in the south up to the north,
So they
because
wouldn't be
they've gotten
euthanized?
stuck.
Oh.
So he went and helped them, and it started this whole new course in his life. And apparently, this is a big thing where they have a big problem with stray dogs down in the south of the United States. And there's this huge rescue operation that brings them up into the Northeast, and then people adopt them. But this is one man's story about that movement and how it not only has changed the lives of the dogs that he has helped, but it's changed his life as well.
Oh, that's nice.
And who doesn't love a dog book? I mean, seriously.
That's right.
So Rescue Road.
Especially with those
Great,
eyes.
thank you.
Mhm.
So come to the library, talk to us about the books that you've been reading, and we'll share some more with you. But mostly, come to the library. We'd love to see you. Thank you.